literally, what does generic isekai even mean? Sure, generic isekai do exist, but they're far from the norm. In fact, even lumping all of this stuff together into one genre called isekai doesn't really make sense. Isekai isn't a genre, it's just one trope or story element. It just means another world. You already know this. Sword Art Online is an isekai about getting sucked into a video game. Seisenshi Donbine is an isekai about getting transported to space battle mech world. Mushoku Tensei is an isekai about being reborn in a real fantasy world. Is Dr. Stone an isekai? Like, isekai just refers to being transported or reborn in a different world. It could be sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, romance, slice of life, drama, action, or any combination of those genres, because those are actual genres. .hack style, Tron style, you're inside a video game is objectively a different setting from Dragon Quest Record of Lodoss War inspired actual fantasy world, even if they have some crossover. And what really annoys me is when people claim that isekai just started to run out of ideas or something after a decade of isekai spam, and that's why it's more diverse now. Even if we just take the post-Sword Art Online era to be the mainstream isekai boom, this narrative just instantly breaks down. So, SAO came out in 2012, and already by 2013 the diversity in isekai is explosive. You had Mondaiji Tachi ga Isekai Kara Kurusou desu yo, which is just immediately very different from SAO, which you would know if you actually watched any of these shows instead of just complaining online. Mondaiji Tachi's characters are already psychic superhumans in the original world. They aren't transported to a video game, but an actual different dimension. The show has an ensemble cast, not just one main character. The tone is completely different. Like, I mean, I watched the show years ago, so I can't remember every detail, but it's just absolutely nothing like SAO. Then you had Outbreak Company, which has a unique premise of there already being a gateway to the other world, which is continuously open and you can go back and forth between, and the main cast being otaku, who have been hired by the Japanese government to spread Japanese culture to the isekai world. It's way less about the mechanics of the isekai world or some sort of RPG progression or how are we going to find our way back to Earth or slay the Demon King or anything like that. It's just a show about otaku passion, the power of moe, the joy of otaku hobbyism, with a little bit of JSDF autism and some pretty strong comedy. Then there was Hataraku Mao-sama, which was already a reverse isekai, and you guys already know this one. Then there's Log Horizon, which actually is very similar to SAO in premise. It's also about being sucked into a video game, but aside from just being miles better in every way, it's also completely different. It's focused on society building. The RPG they're sucked into is a sort of post-apocalypse setting, and the show is about how a group of nerds rebuild society from the ground up with a stronger focus on politics and economics. The first chapter of the Log Horizon La Novelle is literally named Homesteading the Noosphere after the book by Eric S. Raymond, which is an anthropological and economic study of the open source software community. Log Horizon reflects a kind of techno-optimism of the early 2010s, when it really did seem like tech nerds were taking over society and that might be a good thing, that they might genuinely be able to build something different and better on the principles of the open internet and open software collaboration. So I'm sorry, which one of these is the genre which other isekai are supposed to be generic in relation to? Because they're all extremely diverse. In fact, we can even go back to 2012, the same year of SAO, there was another season of Zero no Tsukaima, the show which was really the origin point of modern isekai, not SAO. If you've seen Zero no Tsukaima, then you already know it's nothing like modern generic isekai. And then there was Dog Days Season 2. Dog Days being another isekai which predates SAO, at least the anime, is completely different in tone, setting, premise, character, etc. The thing is, there's always some kind of an excuse. When isekai gets weird or strays from the norm in the current era, it's, oh, they're running out of ideas. When it's demonstrated that isekai has always been very broad and diverse in the past, it's, oh, well, the genre was just experimenting and finding its footing, it hadn't really solidified yet. But I promise you, I've seen all the isekai. I've gone through the entire history. I've seen more isekai than almost anyone. While I will happily grant that a lot of it isn't very good, that's different from dismissing the whole thing as unoriginal, lazily written slop. If you turn your brain on while you're watching, you'll come to find that given the lack of oversight, the creative freedom within isekai as a genre creates a spawning ground for stuff that strays into the territory of avant-garde. Like take Sokushi Chito, a show I think most people just sort of their eyes glaze over as they scrolled past it on my anime list, like, oh, it's just another OPMC isekai power fantasy show, but I can tell that no one actually watched it, and the people who did weren't really paying attention, because Sokushi Chito is absolutely batshit fucking insane and completely unlike any piece of media I've ever seen. The premise might draw in your mind comparisons to One Punch Man. It's about a main character who has the power of instant death, a sort of meta joke about overpowered protagonists, while still being a show centered around an overpowered main character, satirizing the trope while still doing the trope. But this is not just Isekai One Punch Man, not even close. One Punch Man tries to tell something like a traditional narrative. Sokushi Cheat is just so far beyond that. Spoilers, but the main character of Sokushi Cheat isn't just some guy who gets a cheat skill in the isekai world. No, he fucks up the entire premise of the isekai world because he's not human. He's literally a cosmic horror Lovecraftian being who stretches the bounds of reality. He's not some guy with an instant death power, he is the embodied cosmic essence of endings, who just happens to look like a Japanese high schooler. He can just kill anything with a single thought as easily as he blinks. In fact, just like blinking, he does it unconsciously. If someone even thinks about harming him, he can sense it, and in fact, just thinking about harming him strong enough might be enough for his skill to kill you automatically. Whenever you think the show is building tension, one-upping itself, introducing more and more powerful opponents or circumstances, you always think, okay, surely he's gonna have some trouble here. No, instant death, always. When you think someone's found a loophole around his power, no, instant death. They even introduce a character who really is some guy with an instant death power, and the protagonist kills him too. It's the only show I've ever seen that actually embodies the idea of a cheat skill. It really does feel like he's cheating, like the show is fundamentally unfair in a way which just diffuses the narrative. It's like watching funny games from the antagonist's perspective. It's a show which is about a character who you literally can't tell a story about. You can't do narrative to this character, and so it has no choice but to become a story about the impossibility of ever creating a story with this character in it. To give you an idea of the unfairness of this anime, at one point the main character falls down into a chasm, and you might think, oh, he's finally in a pickle. Sure, he has an instant death power, but he's not immune to fall damage. He's gonna crash to the bottom and die, right? But no, because before he reaches the bottom, to break his fall, he kills his momentum. It's batshit insane, it's meta as fuck, and the isekai genre is so diverse and avant-garde and bursting with creativity that even a show this weird was just passed by as completely stock standard for the genre and not even deserving real discussion. Now look, I could go through a million different shows and point and gawk at the screen like, bro, he's literally a vending machine, how can you say this is generic? When have you ever seen a story which is so interested in the intimate dynamics of practical living while being a conscious vending machine? He literally talks via sentence mixing like it's a TF2 SFM. But let's take a step back. If I just pick a few shows as examples, I could be accused of cherry picking. If I went through explaining the premises of a whole bunch of shows one by one, that would be a really boring video. If I just make sweeping declarations, I'm not providing any evidence, so let's try and find a sweet spot. Because isekai might not be a coherent genre, but it does have tropes, and it does definitely have subgenres within it. What I want to do is zoom in on just one example of something which I like that goes unappreciated as a particular subgenre of isekai, a particular formation of tropes used to craft a type of story which I think most people in the West just don't get. It's true that isekai, much like a lot of other shonen or shonen-inspired media, has a lot of overpowered main characters. This is often written off as nothing more than just a nerd power fantasy, and I find this kind of frustrating. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you saying that's never the case. It is the case sometimes, maybe even a lot of the time. Just calling something a power fantasy is not an argument. That's not even actual criticism. Just like anything else, it can be done well or it can be done poorly. In fact, OPMC might literally be the oldest trait in human storytelling history. Are like ancient Greek hero myths not OPMC power fantasies? Is Odysseus just a wish fulfillment self-insert? But setting that aside, these power fantasies lead to a particular way of storytelling, which I think is unique and interesting, and it's often what drives me to the genre. If you know me, you might know me as a moe otaku, a slice-of-life enjoyer, so it might seem strange that I also like these action-heavy shonen-y isekai shows. But actually, oftentimes, the OPMC isekai genre ends up getting pretty close to just becoming a slice of life. Sure, sometimes the power fantasy is about being so strong that you can destroy any enemy and topple the demon lord or get revenge on the party that wronged you or whatever, but often that power fantasy is just the power to be left alone. It's a power fantasy in the same way Minecraft is a power fantasy. I like isekai shujinko who are pretty much just Minecraft Steve. Like, how Steve can carry an amount of blocks which would be absurdly heavy in the real world, jump 1 meter high, fly, never has to sleep, never gets tired, can kill undead creatures endlessly. That progression of Minecraft, going from surviving the first night in a hole to gradually reshaping the entire world, not for the sake of conquest, but just as an expression of your imagination, to create a new environment, oftentimes to hang out with your friends. That's what the OPMC isekai protagonist does too. I can name a bunch of examples, from Isekai Nonbiri Noka to Slime Isekai to Isekai Yakyo to Kuma 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 Bear. These are shows which focus on helping your friends and creating a better world for everyone. The O-penis, that sounds like I just said penis, is real and it is a form of power. Yes, it is a power fantasy, but do we really think that's a negative in this instance? The desire to use your power for good, to be able to see someone else actually using their power for good, as opposed to the real world where powerful people seem intent on ruining everything for no reason. Oh, it's escapism. Oh, it's a power fantasy. Yeah, it's good escapism. It's a good power fantasy. Well, when it's well written at least. But that's just incidental. That's just the preconditions. Would anyone ever call Star Trek a power fantasy because you're watching the captain of the Federation's flagship travel at impossible speeds using hyper-advanced technology to explore the galaxy? What else is that if not a power fantasy? Except no one would describe it like that, because power fantasy is just a thought-terminating cliche people use to dismiss any story in which not everything has to be an endless fucking struggle, which they decide they don't like. I'll grant, there are shows I like which do fit the more typical usage of this term, like Arifureta for example, but I like Arifureta because I like slice-of-life romance anime in general. No one would call Arifureta slice-of-life romance, but if you think about it, that's really what it is, or at least what it becomes as it goes on. Low-stakes, isekai, harem, slice-of-life romance action. It's like Minecraft. You build the farms, you mine the resources, you enchant the armor, but that's only in service of the sandbox gameplay, the video game version of a slice of life in a sense. I don't use the term isekai in my day-to-day life. I prefer to say naro-kei because it's actually more descriptive. So you guys know about AO3, Archive of Our Own, the fanfiction smart website? Okay, imagine a world where, like, I don't know, Harry Potter fanfic is the most popular thing on the website. Then one day, AO3 bans all fanfiction because of copyright concerns and says, okay, you're gonna have to write original stories now. Alright, in that hypothetical world, what do you think would happen next? Well, I can guarantee you that the site would be full of stories which are all coincidentally set in wizard schools with 4 houses, and, you know, you can't just delete the culture of the site by changing the rules. That inspiration would stay central. But over time it would evolve and diversify, while certain tropes which originated from the popularity of Harry Potter fanfic would become canonized. So I know this would happen because this is exactly what happened in real life to the website Shousetsuka ni Narou. Remember I mentioned Zero no Tsukaima earlier? So Zero no Tsukaima is itself basically a Harry Potter fanfic, right? Like, it's very obviously inspired by Harry Potter. It was in the 2000s, the most popular fanfic vehicle on the Japanese fanfic website Shousetsuka ni Narou, which means let's become an author or something like that. Until the site banned fanfic over copyright concerns. Japan has super strict copyright laws. Since Zero no Tsukaima is a fantasy isekai with the influence of Harry Potter and Japanese fantasy in general, which traces back to Dragon Quest, Record of Lodoss War, Wizardry, and go watch the Artificial Night Sky video about that, they just kept writing Zero no Tsukaima inspired fiction, but just changed certain parts of it and experimented more and more. Certain elements from Zero no Tsukaima became canonized, and some of those stories became super popular themselves, like Mushoku Tensei, and then that created its own canonized tropes, and on until we reach this modern condition of massive creative breadth on the one hand, with certain elements being strictly canonized on the other hand. By the way, all of the so-called book talk romance stuff which is popular these days, like, heated rivalry or captive prince or whatever, this is pretty much the same thing in the West, but it's mostly targeted at women, and it took a lot longer for mainstream publishers and mass media gatekeepers to notice that there was big profit to be made here, aside from the exception of maybe 50 Shades of Grey. Like, with 50 Shades of Grey, AO3 and these other fanfic websites have a reputation for being full of smart or at least heavy on fan service and self-insert power fantasy stuff. In Japan, there was already a really big doujin industry deeply intertwined with the otaku media industry more broadly, so the gap for crossover to happen wasn't so wide. Plus, there were a few early successes, and there's a large industry of low oversight, cheap fan service heavy media represented in otaku media already, so Shousetsuka Narou adaptations slotted into the established industry more smoothly. Just to be clear here, I'm just inserting this while I'm reading the script. This narrative is a little oversimplified. There are some isekai stories which don't come from Shousetsuka Narou and predate some of this stuff, including Sword Art Online. It's a little more complicated than I'm making it seem, but this is like a general overview of the history. So in the West, mainstream TV and movies, and even to some extent book publishing, is more heavily gatekept. They're more scared of being associated with the low art and low culture of anything fanservice-y, self-insert-y, whatever. There's this sort of pride in being above the riffraff, and somehow this idea that they're doing something qualitatively distinct from open, collaborative, internet-based literature. Also in the West, that stuff was more associated with women, and I am 100% sure that misogyny played a big role in why mainstream culture has been so slow on the uptake. Ragging on Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey for basically being the same as any light novel self-insert romance but targeted at women was a mainstay of culture for way too long, and I for one will not stand for it. We love our fujoshis and shoujo romance enjoyers here at IDMR, okay? I barely even began to cover the differences between the Japanese and Western media industries and their relationship to internet fan creation here. Okay, there's a lot to go into, and I kinda just bumbled around and stream of consciousness wrote whatever, so if you want a more carefully structured look at this, let me know in the comments and I'll make that video. And while you're there, if you like the sound of my voice, you may be interested in the weekly hour-long podcast I release on Patreon, link in the description. Anyway, back to Isekai. So this script is kind of all over the place, and I just want to come back to the first point, right? You can call it bad, you can not like it, that's just your taste and it's fine. Now, it would be surprising to me if you couldn't find anything you liked, given how much naro-kei anime there is and how broad and diverse it is, so I think you should be open-minded and give it a shot, but whatever, you do you. The only point I want to make is I just don't like these unironic accusations of this stuff being slop or generic or lazy as a general rule. I just don't think it's true. I think if you actually watched these shows or read these manga or whatever, you'd know it isn't true. Oh, and one more thing. I think a reason people are very willing to dismiss this stuff without giving it a fair shot is that normie anime fans just only care about frames. They don't even know what good animation looks like. They love impossibly ugly garbage like Kimetsu no Yaiba's fight scenes because wow, it has a lot of colors and effects and lots of frames. That must equal good animation, right? They're like toddlers when you dangle keys in front of their face. If 50 animators didn't die from overwork in service of this anime, then I don't want to see it. They obviously don't care about the quality of the writing. I mean, these are the same people who unironically think Kaguya-sama is a good show. Look how much they shat on One Punch Man Season 3. I'll accept that it had piss-poor production values and that was an obvious misplay. They should have known that for such a mainstream show people weren't going to accept that level of production. But One Punch Man Season 3 is bad because it's badly written, because it's badly paced, the story is bad. If it told a good story, I couldn't give less of a shit if it was a fucking slideshow drawn in crayons by a 3-year-old. Or people not understanding the difference between cinematography, art, and character design versus animation. Azumanga Daioh has 10 frames per episode and half of them are reused cuts, but it's a fucking masterpiece because it uses creative cinematography and editing and top-tier character design and art to make it work. Or the original Gundam or Macross or Legend of the Galactic Heroes or any of these shows which are considered all-time classics would just be shit on by tourists if they came out today because they don't have enough frames and flashing lights to satisfy them. Those shows are just really well written. Who gives a shit if the mechs move at 3 FPS? This isn't a video game. Seriously, terminal video game brain has people talking about anime like it's video game graphics. Ultimately, it's just lazy criticism to point to some otaku-centric late-night anime having limited animation and decide that makes it bad. As I said, lots of naro-kei anime might not look like it, but they're actually slice-of-life stories, and you don't need the flashiest, framiest animation to tell a good slice-of-life story. Okay, this video is fucking stupid. Goodbye.